Welcome back. Now, a group of contractors are accusing the Gauteng Education Department of failing to manage and administer the National School Nutrition Program. Payments delays remain a problem despite a commitment by the provincial government to even settle those invoices within 15 to 30 days. And I want to remind you of that figure, 15 to 30 days. We have Lisa Sukdev in studio today, and she speaks then for the group of service providers and joins us for more on this conversation now. Lisa, thank you so much for the time. Before we get to this conversation, however, we do apparently have one of the suppliers on the line right now, wishing, however, to remain anonymous. It's a good evening to you, and just wanted to ask your situation and what it currently looks like then in relation to this nutrition program. Anonymous, good evening.
Hi, good evening, sir.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. Wanted to ask, just if you detail your situation to us, please, then, what it is that it pretty much looks like at this stage. Have you been paid, and what that looks like?
No, we have not been paid. It's been over 2 months. Our invoices are detailing since February this year. So February we were not paid, March we were not paid. We have gotten to a position where our suppliers, which we owe for 2 months, have now stopped giving us stock because the exposure is too much. We have written to the department. We have alerted them of our situation to say it's making it difficult that we can continue to deliver for the month of April if we have not been paid for the past 2 months. All of our correspondence have gone on unanswered. Even now, as we are, we do not know when the next payment will be made.
What reason have they given you when you ask why you haven't been paid? Because I thought the commitment was meant to be, as we made sure in our intro, 15 to 30 days.
That's what we understand. On the last State of the Province address, Premier emphasized that the contractors need to be paid within those times. That's what we know. That's what the SLA say. But as I said, our emails have gone unanswered. We do not know what is the reason for the payment that has been held back. All we know is that we have submitted the invoices, that they have approved them, but there is no money that has come through.
What does this ultimately mean then for your business as well then, for your livelihood?
For us is, it means literally that we are unable to now continue with this contract because the department has suffocated our cash flow to a point where we're saying we are exposed. We are exposed over 4 million rand. As a small black company, you cannot expect us to continue bankrolling this project.
Very interesting. We're going to try and get the provincial government as well on board to have this conversation with us because clearly a few more answers are needed then. Anonymous, thank you so much for the time there. Appreciate it. Lisa is still joining me then, of course, in studio. Lisa, this clearly is the plight then of a lot of the suppliers.
You know, sadly, you've got a very, very valid process.
Yeah.
But you've got department officials that act with impunity, that cherry-pick their service providers, and then when they are held to account for their maladministration, for their inactivity, they then victimize the service providers. Now, Sepo is saying to you, sorry, the gentleman was saying to you that there is over 4 million rand that is owing to him because he hasn't been paid for about 2 months.
Yeah.
Can I tell you, and I'm making statements, I'm not making allegations. Every single thing that I say to you on air today, we have proof to submit, right? There is about 10 service providers that have not been paid. Now, if we take this National Schools Nutrition Program and we put it on the table and we look at it, the reality is this. You've got 1.7 million learners. You've got 49 service providers that have successfully been awarded the tender.
Yeah.
But we are currently sitting in a situation where the cherry-picked service providers are getting an allocation of like 80,000 learners within a small vicinity, right? Yeah. Then you've got the victimized service providers that are getting like 12,000 and 8,000 allocation of students. Now, if you take that in a business context, right? Business do not stipulate to government what the rate is per learner. Government stipulates that. It's about R4.30
I
per
believe
student.
that primary school learner, it would be R4.13 and then R4.33 for a high school pupil.
Correct.
Yeah.
Now, that is for 2 meals a day. Now, if you take 8,000 learners at that rate, and then you're being asked to then deliver somewhere very far away from your warehouse, it becomes absolutely impossible to continue delivering on that service. And I have to tell you that when they put out that bid, there was very specific criteria. So they asked for a minimum of 1,000 square meter warehouse. They asked for specifics in terms of trucks that each service provider had to have.
Even if you're not going to be feeding the high number of students that they've allocated.
Correct, because it would make sense that you take the 1.7 million and you divide it by the 49 service providers.
100%.
Number one, to make it fair, and number two, for it to then be beneficial to the service provider. Because remember, a business is a business. It's not a charity or an NPO.
So ultimately, we're saying here that what is happening within the province here is that they're choosing who they're giving these contracts to, and then the other businesses and the other suppliers who have been chosen within all of this are only getting a small proportion of these contracts, which are making it unviable for them to actually continue to do so. And the people that ultimately then suffer are the students and the kids.
Correct.
At this point in time, are the kids still being fed?
So in the week that passed, okay, you'll see in a Sunday Times report as well, it tells you that schools in Soweto sent the children home because they had no, remember?
This is during the school year.
Yes, this is the week.
It's not a holiday of any sort,
No.
just during the school year.
Correct. So you must take into account that the 1.7 million learners in Gauteng that are being fed, right? These come from the poorest of the poorest homes. The reality is that many of these children come to school first to get a meal and subsequently end up getting an education. And the maladministration and the blatant corruption by the Gauteng Department of Education, they are using children as a human shield to advance their own personal needs. Not even needs, their personal greed. And that is a statement that we are making. And I can validate that statement by saying, if we had to look at the current bid process, the results were published. We've got companies that have been awarded the bid that were not even in good standing with CIPC.
Wow.
Then you've got where it is gazetted in Treasury that for every one of these tender processes, due diligence is supposed to be done. Okay? We as a collective have identified where companies have doctored their CSD reports. We've got other companies where they've supplied compliance documents that are incorrect. And the government officials did not do basic due diligence.
So all of this is then being overlooked ultimately in order to just continue to supply what you believe are the friends of those that are then selecting
100%.
the suppliers.
We've got officials that continue to act with impunity, and something has to be done. Enough is enough. And as much as the teams that I represent are being victimized, you know, Mandela said it, in order for evil to prevail, all that it requires is for good men to do nothing.
100%.
And the more we do not talk about this, the more we do not address it, the more it shall continue.
So what happens at this stage? Is this then yourselves then as the scheme's bidders then ultimately looking to take this to court, trying to put in some law? I mean, making it known, of course, is one thing. Getting anything done is another thing altogether sometimes. You know, so what happens from here?
So I love the question, because it's so important. Yes, we do have legal recourse.
Yes.
So this particular tender is in court for the second time, right? The first time it was awarded, there was another company that brought a application, and that court order was in effect, and the government had until the 28th of February.
This year.
Correct.
Yes.
In order to end that contract.
Sure.
Important to note that on the 28th of February, in the afternoon, almost at the close of business, they then sent out an email to successful bidders asking them to come in and sign their letter of appointments. When the bidders went through on the 3rd, okay?
3rd of March, yes.
Of March, to sign those letters, they were then asked to backdate that.
To the 28th of February.
Correct, because the department was already in violation of the court order.
So they hadn't done away with the previous set ultimately
No.
at that stage yet.
No. Further, they then, because they didn't have their house in order,
Sure.
they didn't have their administration in order. So in addition to then signing on the new bidders, they then extended the contract of the old bidders for a further 30 days. So for the month of March, you had bidders from the old contract and the new contract working concurrently, which is a direct violation of the court order that was in place. But as I said, department officials continue to act with impunity and, in this case, above the law.
The people who are struggling here or failing in all of this and not getting what is necessary are the 1.7 million pupils that are part of this feeding scheme, that is this nutrition program, that is 9 billion rands worth ultimately. So you believe that some of that money is ultimately, one, because the most important thing for me also, and amongst all of this, is that the pupils are still being fed, right? It is still quality food that is being fed to them.
Correct.
Despite it not being to the right people, perhaps, in terms of procedure. Is that correct? That is still happening?
Correct.
Now the problem is because the contracts have been so misaligned that now we don't have a few pupils being fed.
Correct. So in addition to, again, the government department using the children as human shields, right? You now have, this process was created to empower black business. You are disempowering the people that you have allocated this contract to. So not only do you have children now starving, not only do you have frustrated SGBs, principals, educators, okay, but then you also have service providers that are completely disempowered.
Does this mean you're bound to find some service providers even go out of business? Because this may have been a heavy lifeline for them.
100%. I mean, if you have to look at the margin that you're able to make on this, it's very small.
Sure.
And now you're taking, in addition to that, service, so credit terms have now, credit lines have all been eliminated because service providers, the suppliers to the service providers can no longer carry the risk of providing them with a credit line.
Too much money now.
And now you've got people who have no cash flow having to then go and source funds elsewhere where they've got to pay for it. So how then does that serve this country in any way? And then you're looking at driving unemployment, because if each one of these service providers that have been allocated the bid are unable to continue, what happens to the warehousing they've paid for, the vehicles they've paid for, the staff that work for them?
So ultimately, legal recourse is ultimately where this is headed, you feel?
So if I tell you what's happened, so an interdict was, we brought a high court interdict against the department.
Okay.
The judge looked at the interdict and she said, look, let's not approve the interdict because at the end of the day, children still need to be fed. What she's advised us to do is to take it on review.
Okay, so the interdict would have stopped the supply of this food, of the nutrition to these kids already.
Correct. And that would have not served the interest of the children.
Yes.
Again, children being used as human shields by the government because they know litigation in this country takes forever.
Yeah.
However, this matter is being taken on review, and we know that at the end of this review process, we will be successful because it is blatant, it is clear, there's proof for everything. Absolutely every statement that is made against the government, the Gauteng Department of Education.
Yeah.
And all we're saying, if I may please, all we're saying is we don't want to be fighting with the GDE. The National School Nutrition Program is there so that learners can get nutrition, so that their brains are able to develop, so that they can get a quality education, improve their position and that of our economy and this country. We want to work with them. But number one, they need to be held accountable. Number two, let's have a transparent process and let's work together for a common cause, a positive outcome for all involved in this process. That is what we've been appealing, and the only reason we've taken this to the courts is because the department officials completely ignore any communication. They ignore any request for a meeting. Let us resolve what the issues are.
Yeah.
Communicate with us as service providers so we are able to do what we can to make sure
help
that
and make sure this happens.
the children are not impacted negatively.
Lisa, appreciate the time. Thank you so much. I think important to bring this to light. Of course, we are also saying then to the Gauteng Department of Education that you do ultimately have a right of reply right here on the show. Please do come in. Let's share your thoughts. What is actually going on behind the scenes here? Why is it that this feeding scheme has ultimately collapsed in certain areas? And perhaps is the processing itself correct as it currently stands? And what is going on in terms of a deeper situation here? Lisa, Sukdev, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us. The spokesperson then for disgruntled bidders for the Gauteng Education School Feeding Scheme, a 9 billion rand scheme that is then, that feeds at least about 1.7 million pupils.